Welcome to the Love History podcast, where we explore what happens when an LGBTQ plus historian and a mudlark chat to their friends about their shared love of history. I'm Marie-Louise Plum, known on socials as Old Father Thames.
And I'm Mock O'Keefe, and you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube as @GayAristo. And in this podcast, we chat to fellow history lovers, people working in history, and people who are making history by the lives that they are living.
So sit back, relax, make your beverage of choice, and welcome to the Love History podcast. And do remember to subscribe and follow so you can hear all the episodes in Series 1. So, Mock, tell me, what have you been up to, historically speaking, recently?
So, historically speaking, recently I have a show every Sunday night on Glitter Beam Radio, Music with Sparkle, and that's online on DAB and all your smart devices. It's at 8 o'clock. It's called History Out of the Closet, and between 8 and 10 p.m, as well as playing some banging tunes. I also talk about LGBTQ plus history and LGBTQ plus community matters. So I've been researching and getting myself ready for next week's show. How about you? What have you been up to, historically speaking?
Well, I've been preparing for the next meeting, the next Social Society of Thames Mudlarks meeting. I've been looking through my recent finds, getting some bits ready, looking at what I might like to ask some of the learned mudlarks about. So that's me, really, just looking over recent finds. So on today's episode, however, it's all about you, Mock. It's about your PhD adventures, living as a lord in a baby castle in Wales. I've got lots of questions for you, but if anyone else would like to ask us a question at any time, please email lovehistorypodcast@gmail.com. So let's have a listen to our interview and we'll come back and chat about what we've learned.
Over to me.
All right, so Mock, today it's all about you.
I'm ready. I'm in your hands. I'm slightly nervous, but I trust you.
Very wise. Okay, so Mock, tell me about your life in a baby castle in a village in Wales, and how did the becoming a lord thing come about? Because you're a lord in a baby castle in a village in Wales.
I know. It's quite ridiculous, really. I'm the Lord of Glenbark, and I live in an Elizabethan baby castle. It was described by Country Life, no less, as a baby castle in Wales, just outside Abergavenny. I'm from quite a kind of a normal background. My parents are both immigrants to the United Kingdom. My father came here with £1.50 in his pocket and joined the British Army. My mother left school one day and the next day was living in Birmingham and training as a nurse. They were a very successful immigrant family. Education was really important to them. Fitting in was really important to them. So when I came out as gay, they weren't massively happy about that. But they were the kind of immigrant success story. They worked really hard. They bought themselves a house when it was easier to do that. And I would say, a very happy and relatively comfortable, if modest, background. Now, I learned from them the importance of education and the importance of working hard. I have worked incredibly hard, and my husband and I moved to Wales 2 years ago. He is Welsh and wants to go back to the homeland and be nearer to his family. And so we came here and we were looking originally at a house that was owned by Lady Jane Grey, believe it or not, which would have been absolutely amazing over in Carmarthenshire, but lots of problems with the lease, etc. So we ended up not buying that. We saw this house here at Abergavenny when we were already buying the other one. So I said, we're not going to be those people. We're not going to say we're pulling out to buy this one, but I always liked it. I remember sending it to my eldest niece and saying, do you fancy living in a castle with a turret? Anyway, so when we pulled out of the other house, because we had to eventually, this house, which had been sold, came back on the market. So we rushed down the motorway the next day and came to see it. And it's beautiful. It is in about 2 acres of grounds. We've got a knot garden, we've got a paddock, we've got a vegetable garden, there's stables, a beautiful wisteria walkway and a pond. It's from about 1530s. Originally, an
Wow.
Elizabethan hall house, Hall, that was then expanded over the years, and Elizabethans grew into the Georgians and the Victorians. The Victorians poshed it up and put the turret on, and as I said, it became a baby castle. And when I bought it, it was sort of mentioned briefly to me, but it was many, many years ago, somewhere in a, we're not quite sure, it's lost in the annals of time, so I need to find out more. But the owner of this
Mhm.
property was made the lord of the manor. And so the property
Oh,
itself comes with a lordship title. So it's not an aristocratic title. I'm not Lord Glenbark. I am the Lord of Glenbark. It's of a particular area. And with that, what we think happened is that in the Great Hall, where I'm talking to you now, is where the Lord, who was representative of the monarch, would have held trials and court cases and presided judgment. And then the convicted would have gone up the road to what is now our pub to be executed. So that is what the lordship gave you then.
wow.
Now it gives me free water, which is rather exciting. And apparently, the last Lord of Glenbark told me that if I put it on my passport, when I check in for a flight, he said 9 times out of 10 he was upgraded to business class. So I like the fact that my father came here with nothing in his pocket, and here his son is, many decades later, a lord living in a castle. And what I also love, if I'm honest, going to school, I was quite badly bullied. They used to use lots
Ah,
of names to criticize me, and one of the things is they used to call me is Gaylord. And I think now, yeah, I am a
yeah.
Gaylord, so I win.
You most certainly do win. Wow, gosh, what a story! So I didn't know about that. That trials were held in your essentially your home, and the executions would happen down the road in the pub.
Yeah, and the pub's really
Wow,
haunted, really haunted. It's got a poltergeist. It's always on television. And actually, you can go and stand and look at the point. They still have a noose there, which is where people were executed. So have your Sunday lunch and watch it swing.
blimey, that's a bit grisly, isn't it? But so living in this baby castle, there must be some challenges. Challenges of living in a historic house. So what are the pros and the cons of living in a historic building?
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. The life you see on social media, at Gay Aristo on Instagram and TikTok, I share, and on YouTube, I share, lovely pictures of the Knot Garden or me wandering through the paddock. But there are challenges. It is beautiful. It is incredibly expensive to heat. I'm very aware this is a position of privilege and it is a first world problem. But it costs just to heat the building between 12 and 16,000 pounds a year, and we don't have the heating on
Ooh.
in every single room. In fact, in the turret, which is just behind me here, the boiler broke because we have boilers all around the place. The boiler broke last year, and I thought, oh well, it's November. We only use it as guest accommodation, it's like the guest wing. I won't bother getting it fixed. When I did get it fixed, obviously something happened over the winter, and the
Oh,
rooms heated up and the ceiling in the kitchen in the turret fell in. So there's lots of challenges around that. There are challenges around decorating, simply because you have to use a
mm,
particular kind of paint, because these walls are many hundreds of years old. If you put the wrong paint on them, it will peel off, it will go moldy very, very quickly. That's a challenge. And also, because it's so old, sometimes things go wrong. So this winter we've had some leaks in the turret. We've had water coming in through some of the windows, which, let's face it, they're over 500 years old. They've done pretty well. So we've got to, and the thing is, I can't just go to B&Q buy a replacement window. Other DIY shops are available, but you have to get specialist craftspeople in, and it costs an absolute fortune. So I actually have a bank account that I put money in every single month, which is kind of my literally rainy day, as it was the summer house account.
blimey, that is a lot. But I mean, the pros rather than the cons. The pros is it's do
I
you
mean, I
walk
love it.
around there every day and think this is amazing? Because
Yeah,
yeah,
I love it,
it's
and particularly because I've had I've had my challenges in my life. At one point in my life, I lost all my money, I lost my job, and I actually lost my home during the recession. And sometimes I will sit here in the evening on the turret lawn, on a lovely Lutchins bench with a cup of tea, a dog, and my husband beside me, looking up at the turret. And I feel very blessed. I know I worked incredibly hard to get here, but I was given a good set of cards. I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to have those cards. I played them well. And I do remember the night before I left my home in 2010, feeling absolutely wretched because I was selling it and as far as I was concerned, I'd failed. And here I am 14 years later, living in my own baby castle. So there is a moment sometimes where, again, I say, you know, I did well, I worked hard, and I'm reaping the benefits now.
Absolutely, as you should. And it's nice to hear a success story. I like a success story, especially after a bit of hardship. I like to hear the ups.
I think I appreciate it more because I think, yes, I worked hard and I managed to buy my first flat in my 20s in London, which was relatively easy to do in those days. I am, after all, 107.
Mm.
I lived in New York, I lived in Sydney. I had what I thought was an amazing life. And I really thought I was someone. And I don't think I would like the person I was then necessarily if I met them now. So
Uh-huh.
whilst I wouldn't ever have wanted or welcomed that level of financial or emotional challenge. Actually, I think it's made me a better person. It's made me appreciate what I have a lot more and probably be a little bit more modest in the way I live my life.
Wow, that's interesting. So, a humbling experience which has benefited you, so you can pull the benefits out of that. And what's interesting to me is that you're living in this historic property and you're on your PhD journey. And that PhD is, well, I'll let you explain it because I might get it wrong, but it's to do with the country house as a refuge for LGBTQ plus people, I think it is. But you tell me about your PhD. Yeah, tell me about that, please.
Yeah, so when you say I'm doing a PhD, I still can't quite believe it. I'm in year 2 of 6 years because I'm doing it part time with the University of Buckingham. And I wasn't particularly academic at school. I'm quite street smart.
Hmm.
I'm quite clever, but I had to work really hard to come around middle of the class in school. And certainly history didn't particularly interest me at school. And I think that's why I'm studying the history I am looking at now. So when my husband and I moved to Wales a couple of years ago, there was a lot to do here. I'd been running my own business for a number of years, a successful management consultancy. I had a number of people working for me, etc. And I was just exhausted. And I said, I'm going to take some time off. I used to work 6.5 days a week. I was frequently in 3 or 4 different beds during the week. I said, we've moved to Wales for a new life, a different life. I'm going to take a month off and kind of just really bury myself in this new life. And during that month, I kept seeing all these adverts for a master's in country house studies at the University of Buckingham. And at first I laughed and thought, oh my God, you can't do a master's in that. But I love country houses. As a child, I was taken to them. I was in Country Life last year and I talked about the fact that I grew up near Kenwood House in London and my parents and I would go on a Sunday. I was
Mm.
always taken around National Trust properties, loved them. So I looked at this once I believed there was really a qualification in it and thought, I'm not clever. I've only got a GCSE or O level. I'm that old in history, and it's a grade B. I'm not sure I get accepted. So I put it off, put it off, put it off. But then I did apply the day before applications closed, and to my shock and surprise, I got a phone call a week later and found myself suddenly in an interview for the course. Was accepted and spent a year going up to London for lectures at the Reform Club with a chap called Adrian Tinnerswood, who was given an OBE for his
Yes,
services to country houses. And maybe we'll have him on our second series. I do hope so.
that would be fantastic.
But as the year started to come to an end and we started to think about what we were going to write about, I'll tell you a little bit in a minute about what I was going to write about, but I started to get really sad because I thought, this is going to end and I'm loving it and I don't want it to end. And so I spoke to my supervisor
Mm.
about that and he said, look, I think you've got a PhD in you. Um, have a think about it again. That kind of self-doubt, could I can't be Dr. Mock for goodness sake. It does sound rather cool. So I converted the masters. I didn't finish the masters. I got credit for the time, converted it to the PhD, and my
Wow.
subject changed.
Right. So what were you initially doing then,
Yes,
or what?
initially I was going to write about fireplaces in the country house and
What?
yeah,
What?
the symbolism of fireplaces.
Oh,
Because how you
fascinating.
constructed your fireplace, the signals that you sent out, whether or not it was how much you supported a monarch, how wealthy you were, what your religion might be. So you've got someone like Elizabeth I proclaiming, what a good Protestant fireplace looked like. A lot of them would have biblical scenes on, whether that was a Catholic biblical scene, whether that was a Protestant, Anglican biblical scene. Someone like Craigside up in the north of England, the fireplace is so massive because this industrialist was so rich. It was a room inside the fireplace that you can sit inside. It's so big. He's so wealthy. He's such a massive man. So I was going to be writing about the symbolism of fireplaces. But what happened to me is, as I started to read more about country houses and thinking of my own experience of them as a gay man, I never saw myself represented in them. I never saw any history of anyone who was queer in a country house. And yet, the more I read, the more I discovered hidden history of what I call LGBTQ plus ancestors. And that's why it's called the gay aristo. Initially, I was going to share the stories of these aristocrats who lived in grand country houses. And I thought there's a whole history of people here who haven't been shared, who aren't known.
Mm.
And so my PhD now is looking at the country house as a place of community, as a place of refuge, and a place of safety for the LGBTQ plus community from 1900 to 1967, because 1900, just after the Oscar Wilde trial, the love that dare not speak its name, right up to 1967, which was the repeal of the Sexual Offences Act, which meant that you could have sex with a man over the age of 21 behind two locked doors with no one in the vicinity or no one likely to be in the vicinity.
Can I just say 1967?
Yeah.
1967. I mean, what?
Some of the laws against homosexuality in Scotland were repealed in the 80s, and some in Northern Ireland even more recently. And, same-sex marriage isn't recognised across the whole United Kingdom either.
So what you're doing is your PhD studies, and you're you do lots and lots of different things. And actually, I don't know how you cope with it all, because you're doing your PhD. You have your business, and you have the Gay Aristo, where you're running, you're sort of putting forward these hidden histories and shining a light on lots of things that people probably may not have come across.
Yeah, so it started as kind of LGBTQ plus history, but now it's kind of morphed more into, I have a particular passion and interest in LGBTQ plus history, and that's all I talk about on my Glitterbeam show. But actually, I want to find out what other history has been hidden, whether it is in a fantastic country house. It might be a hidden room, it might be a hidden window, it might be the hidden history of women, it might be the hidden history of people of color. I think that history is written by straight white men, and unless your behavior fits the narrative arc of what's in their interest, then it has been omitted from the history books. So what started as gay aristocrats, about as privileged as you can get, to then LGBTQ plus people, are now widening it to all marginalized people and their history. So that's what I'm focusing on. So it's very broad. And my mind, I'm constantly got 7 or 8 books on the go. I'm never short of content. But that thing about, history is written to a particular narrative. Casanova is known as the great lover of women. He was actually training to be a priest, and he was kicked out of the seminary because he was found in bed making love to a man.
Wow. So obviously, when you think Casanova, straight away you think of a straight guy, romancing women or being a bit of a cad. Wow, did not know that.
In his own autobiography, he talks about his relationships with men, but they've just been omitted from the common knowledge. And again, he's the great lover of women. Actually, some of his behavior with women, we would now say was aggressive. We would say it was domestic violence. We would say potentially that it was sexual abuse. So I think, again, looking at that history, it's not always popular. I do get my fair amount of trolling and negative comments.
Yeah.
But I don't mind, because I'm really trying to stand up for people who haven't been represented historically or aren't able to speak for themselves. I know I'm privileged. I'm white, I'm male, I'm a homeowner, I was born in the United Kingdom, I'm middle class, I have an education, and I have some financial stability. For me, I can either I can either enjoy that privilege, which is kind of what I did before 2010, or I can say, I have been dealt an amazing set of cards here. My role, and my role model actually is Michelle Obama, where she talks about, now I've broken through the door, I'm going to hold it open for other people. So I'm going to use my position of all of those things, my position of privilege that I talked to you about then, to then shine a light on other marginalized people who aren't able to do it. So I've got trans friends who are scared to go online, and I've got people who've written to me and saying, I'm in my 80s, I never saw the history of a gay man when I was at school. I've never seen the history of my people. I'm able to represent those people from the position that I have been fortunate enough to find myself in.
This is something I was actually going to ask you about. Can you? I mean, okay, this is two questions. I'll do them separately. So, you said you didn't particularly enjoy history at school, but how do you feel now, looking back at the histories we were taught in school? I mean, I assume you were paying attention a little bit, but yeah, those histories. Well, how do you feel now, looking back, about all the gaps in history where you were either not told something, or perhaps misled, or something was glossed over, or there was a convenient way of describing something or someone not as they actually were?
Yeah, so like
How
I'm
what?
a favorite of the king as opposed to potentially the king's lover. So I feel I feel two things. I feel disappointed, and I feel curious. So disappointed because growing up in the 1980s in a Roman Catholic family and going to quite a traditional British school, being an LGBTQ plus person, realizing that it had its own difficulties, its own traumas. And I think if I had seen the history of what I now call my community in class, I might have had less trauma, less self-harm, less damage to my mental health if I'd seen it. So I learned about Castlereagh. Lord Castlereagh is very interested. He's not liked in Ireland, but he had a huge impact on Ireland in terms of acts of union. Now, there is some documentary evidence that suggests that he was gay, that he was being blackmailed. He got a letter blackmailing him. He went to the king, told him that he was gay, went back to his landed estate and cut his throat 4 days later. Now, I learnt about Castlereagh from a perspective of him as a politician, etc. But if I'd also understood that around what it means to identify as someone marginalized, about how discrimination worked in the olden days, we'd had a conversation about acceptance, I might have been less traumatized when I was, a teenager. And curious though, because I say, well, there are so many blanks and there are so many blind spots that I'm curious to find what's behind that door. Like when I've been going into the history of country houses, behind, almost behind every curtain and hiding behind every sofa, there's an LGBTQ plus people. So I'm curious to find out more.
That is a nice analogy there. Now, I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours about my own questions that I've got for you, but I think we need to go to a few questions from our listeners. And if any of you listening would like to write in and ask us questions, please email lovehistorypodcast@gmail.com and we will pick those up and pass them on to each other. So, the first question here I have for you, Mark, this is from Liz Fennick, the romantic novelist, I think she is. Now, as a historian, do you feel that the language used in historical fiction or older texts, should the language of the time be used, or should it be updated to something more currently acceptable?
Well, that's very interesting. Literally, for my assignment that I've just submitted for my supervisor, I talk and justify about the fact that I talk about queer people. And I know we're going to have a debate about that. I think, firstly, what's interesting is to talk about is the word homosexual only came into being in 1869. It was a chap called Ulrich in Germany who was a lawyer who was gay. and he coined that phrase. So I remember reading some things that said homosexuality was born in 1869. Well, I don't think so. Queers have been here for years. But the terms that we use today, which to some extent are binary, lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, these historical characters would not have recognized them. Certainly someone like Horace Walpole, who may or may not have been gay. There's lots of evidence he surrounded himself with lots of gay men. He never married. There are lots of clues and signals that he may in fact have been a homosexual. Would he have recognized himself as homosexual? If James I did have a relationship with George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham, I think he probably did, would he have called himself gay? He had a wife. Okay, so politically and sort of statesman-wise, he had to give an heir to the throne. Was he bisexual? Those terms just aren't recognized throughout history. So I think it's important to recognize the terms we use today are relatively modern. I have some concern about using some of the terms that were used at the time because they were filled with often hate speech. So that Horace Walpole was described as a finger twirler. And whilst I think that is just hilarious and I love it, I can imagine at the time it would be as awful as someone calling me queer at school, which, to be honest, in the early 80s was a horrible thing to be called as well. However, on that point, we've now reclaimed that word by taking that word and using it for ourselves as a community to describe ourselves. I think we are taking away the power of the person using it as hate speech to oppress us. So I think we can use these modern terms as long as we make the point that they are not historically accurate. These people may not have recognized these terms for themselves, and we're a little bit perhaps more binary today and put ourselves in more closets, strangely, than perhaps our ancestors might have done.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for your thoughts on that. Now, I've got another. Oh, you're gonna like this one because I kind of know a bit of the answer for this already. So, from history fan Annie, what is your favorite LGBTQ plus love story from history?
Well, apart from my own love story with my husband Joe, I must say here, love of my life. I think so. Lots of people know of Emperor Hadrian. Obviously got Hadrian's Wall, but he had a lover called Antoninus, and Antoninus was a little bit younger than him, and Hadrian and him were literally like that. But Antoninus died. He was swimming in the Nile and he drowned. And Hadrian was absolutely bereft. He lay on the floor for 3 days. He wouldn't eat, just crying.
Oh,
He ordered all of the music throughout the entire empire to be silenced.
wow.
All of the major cities in his empire had to build statues to Antoninus. There was a city named after him, and he even named a constellation after Antoninus. And the reason I love that story is because their love is still up there somewhere in the stars.
That is gorgeous. Still up there in the stars. Wow. Well, bittersweet, but that is a lovely love story. We've got another question from David Q. Um, what will you do with your research, Mark, your PhD research? Will there be a public archive or will you write a book about it?
Oh, yeah, it's a good question. So I have to firstly say I'm doing the PhD for me and
Hmm.
for fun. I have lots of responsibilities in my village, in my business, to my family. I'm very involved in my late brother's 3 daughters. They are like my own children. So I have lots of things and commitments I have to do in my life. This is the passion project. This is the fun bit. And whenever I don't get something done for the PhD, I remind myself this is my hobby. This is not, this is not about changing the sheets or having to go to a parents' evening.
Yeah.
So, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure that what I will do with it. I certainly don't imagine me going into academia, into teaching. I'd like to have a platform to share it more. That's one of the reasons we decided to do this podcast together, so we can start talking about this stuff. Possibly a book. I have been asked to write a book, but I just think at the moment, I haven't told my agent, but I think at the moment There's so much going on, and I'm still in it, that I think I want to wait a little bit longer and make sure that I write the right book. But I think certainly this will become a book. I'm doing some speeches about it. I think I mentioned that I was talking at the postgraduate Country House Studies event this summer, and I'm expecting some of that to kind of ramp up. I've done events at private members clubs in London as part of LGBTQ plus History Month and Pride Month. I think you've
Yes.
attended one of them. So I'm starting to just sort of share this message as much as I can. But I would love one day to have a book. And who knows where this podcast might go. You and I, would be lovely if we could share the history of the Thames and other hidden history on a wider platform.
Together on a wider platform. Wouldn't that, we're a good team? That would be a fun thing to do. So let's hope that's coming up very soon. Well, Mock, thank you very much. Did you like being in the hot seat today?
I loved it. I love this stuff. I love chatting to you, and I love the fact that other people are curious. I don't know about their sexuality, whether they're straight or whether they're gay. I know all I can say is that people are asking questions, and when you ask questions, you get the truth. So if we ask questions about hidden history, it will remain hidden for very little longer.
Okay, Mock, well, thank you so much. That was great. I'll be seeing you very soon, in a minute, in fact, to discuss today's podcast.
See you then.
All right, well, thank you, Mock. That was fantastic. So I'm going to ask you what you have learnt today about yourself. What did you learn from that interview?
Oh gosh, I think I learned, and it's reinforced, that this is what I should be doing. This is what I'm passionate about. I literally could have talked to you for hours and hours. I know I've got lots going on in my life. I'm really busy in my business, with my family. I live in two places, London and Wales. But this is what I want to spend the rest of my life talking about, and making sure that I can bring hidden history into the light.
Very good. Well,
and how about you? What did you learn listening to me?
As informative as ever, and likewise, I could talk to you for hours. There's so much we didn't cover about what I've learned there is so much more we could have talked about. But what's really interesting for me is, LGBTQ plus history goes back literal centuries to like ancient Greece, ancient Rome, where we might not have used the same terminology as we do today, but there was same-sex love, relationships, and so there is so much to discover still. And in relatively recent history, I think it feels more like when we started putting the brakes on everything and kind of, you can't do that, and you can do this, and we must define that. So there is so much to learn. So I look forward to seeing many more of your internet shows, your lives, your writing. Yeah, can't wait. So thank you.
Well, there is so much to learn and to share, both about being a mudlark and about LGBTQ plus history. So we are going to do a second series, which is going to be coming later on in the year. We're very excited about that. Now, if you want to send us some ideas for our next series, for an episode, if you want to be a guest potentially on our next series, or if you have some questions for us, then email us on lovehistorypodcast@gmail.com. Apart from that, just to remind you, you can reach out to me on my socials at Gay Aristo. How can they find you?
They can find me at Old Father Thames or Old Father Thames Mudlark on TikTok. So that's my socials.
Great. And wherever you are and whoever you love, thank you for your ears for the Love History podcast. And we will see you on series 2. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye.